The ayes have it. Call on private and local order of the day number 1.
Kaipara District Council Validation of Rates and Other Matters Bill, Committee Stage and Third Reading.
I declare the House in Committee for consideration of the Kaipara District Council Validation of Rates and Other Matters Bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, honourable members. The House is in committee. Kia ora tātou no reira te whare, inga iwi, inga rio, inga hawe wha, tēnā koutou katoa.
Point of order.
Point of order, the honourable member Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr. Chair, I seek leave for all debatable questions on the Kaipara District Council Validation of Rates and Other Matters Bill to be taken as one question.
Is there any objection to that course of action being taken? There is none. Therefore, honourable members, the House is in committee on the Kaipara District Council Validation of Rates and Other Matters Bill.
Mr. Chair.
And the question is that parts 1 and 2 and clauses 1 and 2 stand part.
Mr. Chair.
I call the honourable member Mike Sabin.
Well, I don't know about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, firstly, can I just acknowledge the members of the Select Committee and what has been a very, very challenging piece of legislation, something that actually no one takes any pleasure from and certainly no one wants to deal with. Sir, I'd just like to acknowledge the Chairman, Nikki Wagner, Mr Twyford and members from Labour, and from members right across the Select Committee. They've done a very good job, sir, at getting their heads around something that's very complex. I also just want to acknowledge the Minister. Well, actually, it's been 3 ministers through this journey of this particular bill, but the latest Minister, Chris Tremaine, who have dealt with, in the main, this matter, the support that he's given. And I just want to acknowledge the Commissioners and the CEO from the Kaipara District Council also for the role that they've played in preparing this particular piece of legislation in their objectives of trying to return the Kaipara District Council to democracy and stability. So I also want to acknowledge some people from the local community, Mike Howard, John Dickey, Larry Mitchell, Mark Farnsworth, Greg Gent, Peter and John Bull, and a number of other people who have worked very hard, so we don't always agree on things, but we've worked very hard to try and ensure that the light was indeed shining where it needed to be. Sir, I just want to, set the scene for this bill so that members can traverse the some of the ins and outs at this committee stage, sir. And first and foremost, I just want to say that no one takes any pleasure from being involved in a piece of legislation like this. Sir, this council found itself in trouble and become something of a perfect storm of challenges that involved everyone from the councillors, the CEO, Jack McKercher, the Audit Office, Audit New Zealand, and the Office of the Auditor General, sir. And yesterday, the release of the Auditor, the Office of the Auditor General's report into the EcoCare scheme and the Auditor shone a very, very damning light on all of those parties, and Audit New Zealand and the Office of the Auditor General do not escape that. Sir, this bill actually deals with a number of matters not only related to the Kaipara District Council EcoCare scheme or wastewater scheme, sir. It goes a lot further than that. There are a number of other matters being dealt with, the Mangataroto water scheme, other waste disposal schemes in Dargaville, the forest owners' road impact rate, sir. Actually, this bill actually incorporates a number of failings on the behalf of this council over a significant period of time, dating well back into the 90s. So while the lightning rod certainly has been the wastewater scheme at Mangawhai, sir, this bill is actually remedying a number of other issues that absolutely need the attention of this House. So if we turn now to what is the most substantive matter, the EcoCare scheme. So this really goes back into the mid-90s when a decision was made to investigate and ultimately plan for and build a reticulated wastewater scheme for the community of Mangawhai. Indeed, it's well recognised that some form of wastewater scheme is certainly needed. It's just how they went about it how out of depth they got in the course of doing that, and the way in which they contracted out or sought the advice of others because they didn't have that advice within their council, and ultimately the way in which they lost complete control of this particular project, seeing the debt blow out a scheme that was originally costed at around $11 million, ultimately ending up costing somewhere in the vicinity of $63.5 million, sir. Initially, so if we just go back to the history of that, so in the mid-90s, a decision was made to progress this scheme, and it was going to progress as a boot scheme, a build, own, operate and transfer over a 25-year period. The aim of the small council was to try and keep the costs or the debt off their balance sheet, and while that may have had some merit at the time, sir, it all came unravelled in 2002 when a law change meant that the PPP was no longer workable. The council then set about reinventing a process or a sort of morphed boot scheme, if you like, sir, that was never going to be fit for purpose. So rather than having a 25-year period in which that scheme could be transferred, Mr Chair.
The Honourable Member, Mike Stephen.
Thank you, sir. Rather than having a 25-year period and the incentives, I guess, in terms of the PPP in the right place, sir, the aim was to immediately transfer that debt straight back onto the council within a very short period of time, which changed the incentives, sir, and set this whole tailspin off. So, sir, the council found themselves in a position where they were under-equipped, they were underqualified, where they were seeking advice outside of interested parties within council, where they didn't stop to think and reassess the implications of what they were doing with the change of law in 2002, and they set themselves on a path that ultimately has led to where we are now. Sir, in end of 2004, beginning of 2005, this wasn't helped when the contractor for the plant, its parent company, went into receivership. And rather than going back to the market with a basis of, to build a new scheme under the new legislation, so they persisted and carried on as if on a treadmill, that there was only one direction to head, and they engaged another contractor, EarthTech, to take the project, one that was certainly more expensive than originally envisaged, but continued to actually complicate the process thereafter. They then found themselves in a position, sir, where by the time they signed a contract for the scheme in late 2005, they were in a position where they had practically lost control of the project, and I'm not sure they really knew what they were getting themselves into. So at this stage, the scheme was projected to be in the order of $35.6 million, sir. But just to give one small example of how far they got this wrong, the disposal for the wastewater scheme hadn't been included as part of that consenting and the resolution and approval process, something they had allowed $360,000 for, sir, that ended up costing $14 million. So when we start looking at the way in which this project got out of control, there's one small example of some of the failed decision making. Sir, I just want to cover off where things have got to in the last few days as a result of the elections in 2011. Obviously, I was elected, and this was the number one first priority to actually try and make some sense of, sir. Since that time, a government-appointed review team got in around there, and the damning report that was released as a result of that review team saw the resignation of councillors and councillors, and we saw commissioners in place. And obviously, one of the issues that they needed to deal with was the fact that you'd had a council for a number of years who had failed to set rates and failed to manage due process in accordance with their requirements, something that was obviously highly litigious and needed to be remedied. Sir, when we look at the opportunities to do this, they are very limited. And that's why no one wants to actually be in the position that I am today, having to be confronted with this particular legislation. It's an acknowledgement that a lot of people have got it wrong, and blame needs to be sheeted home, and it will be sheeted home. In very recent times, I've made some very strong comments about the role I think the auditor has played in this, and the Auditor General, and also, of course, the councillors, the contractors, and Jack McKercher, the CEO. Sir, and before I was willing to sponsor this bill, I needed an assurance from the commissioners, one, that there was no better way to actually achieve this. And Sir, there clearly wasn't. Refunding the rates, where some would have an enormous windfall of rate refund, and where others would suddenly be burdened with a massive rates bill that they in no way, shape or form deserve, would be wrong, Sir. And then to go about resetting rates by working through each individual rate, through each individual resolution, through each individual process again over that period would take probably a year to 18 months and just almost be impossible and unworkable. So we find ourselves where we are here today, Sir. And I said I would not sponsor this bill if it absolved anyone of responsibility. Members will cover that. That I wouldn't sponsor this bill if it was seeking to validate stuff that they couldn't otherwise do in law. In other words, that there had to be stuff that could be done inside the law in the first place. And that nothing, I would not support anything that validated behaviour that was ultimately criminal. And the decision to expand the scheme, the $30 million decision, was not part of that, Sir.
I call on the honourable